We are jumping right into a seriously profound idea today in this explainer. We're looking at something called the space between, and we're completely rethinking connection and the divine. This whole thing actually started with a super simple request for some minimalist art, but man, it quickly evolved into this massive deep dive into the very nature of connection itself. So settle in, because what we're unpacking today, it might honestly shift how you look at every single relationship in your life.
Okay, let's dive into this. For centuries, across so many different cultures, our traditional view of the divine has been personified, right? It's usually pictured as this solitary figure, a distinct entity that's totally separate from us. But the source material we're looking at today asks us to just completely flip that paradigm on its head. Think about it. What if we stop looking for a who and actually start looking at a how? What if God, or the divine, or whatever you choose to call that ultimate meaning, isn't some isolated person up there, but is rather the actual connection that exists right here between us? To explore this idea, a user gave a super specific visual prompt to an AI, and honestly, the prompt itself is kind of a work of art. They asked for a totally minimalist, one-line art illustration on a stark white background. No shading, zero fill colors, absolutely no gradients, just a single continuous red line. And the instruction was so explicit, quote, show God as a relationship rather than a person. It's actually beautifully ironic when you think about it. Asking this insanely complex, supercomputing AI for literally the most minimalist interpretation of the universe you could possibly get. So instead of a single dominant figure taking up the whole frame, you get this incredibly simple, singular red stroke just weaving two forms together. The simplicity of the prompt perfectly mirrors just how elegant this idea really is. And that single red line introduces us to this amazing concept called the space between. Let's just unpack that definition for a second and really let the idea of an invisible thread fully resonate. When you look at two people, or, two forms woven together by a single line like that, your focus actually stops being on the individuals themselves. Instead, the focus highlights the space between them. It suggests that the divine is that invisible thread, the energy, that living connection, actively flowing from one to the other. By visualizing it this way, the shared bond actually becomes the true center of gravity in our lives. And this brilliantly illustrates a really stark contrast. On the left side of things, we have the traditional view, right? An isolated entity that, let's be honest, often feels pretty abstract and super distant from our messy day-to-day reality. But then, on the flip side, we have this relational view, an invisible thread, a shared bond. See, when you view the highest good or the divine as the connection itself, it instantly becomes active. It becomes something you are actively living, right here, right now, every single time you interact with another human being.
Now, you'd probably assume that a perspective shift this massive had to come from some heavy theological textbook, or maybe some intense intellectual debate. But in the source exchange, when someone asked what inspired this exact interpretation, the user's response was incredibly simple and honestly profound. They basically said, "It's my personal experience." So this wasn't just some abstract theory they read about, this was a reality they had actually felt. And that drastically changes how we interact with the whole idea.
This quote captures exactly why that distinction matters so much. Art that grows out of lived experience always carries a different kind of resonance. It feels less like an intellectual exercise and more like a snapshot of a truth you've actually felt. Just let that sit for a second. A snapshot of a truth you've actually felt. There is just this huge emotional weight to experiencing something directly rather than just trying to think your way through it. When an idea is grounded in what we've actually lived, it just resonates on a completely different frequency.
So why does this matter to you and me? Well, because it entirely redefines the whole concept of grounding spirituality. If the divine is just a distant figure, then spirituality is just this extra thing you do separately from your normal life. Maybe on a certain day of the week or inside a specific building. But if the divine is the connection, literally the space between us, then spirituality shifts from being this abstract concept into a highly active, lived, daily reality. Every single conversation, every shared silence, every tiny act of empathy literally becomes the very place where this profound connection is realized. It totally anchors us directly in our everyday interactions.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a specific phrase the user highlighted from the exchange, giving importance to the space between. It's a phrase that acts almost like a lens. Seriously, once you put those glasses on, the way you view your interactions, your relationships, and just the world at large completely changes. You start looking for that continuous red line everywhere you go.
And this is such a vital shift because it pushes back hard against basically everything we are normally taught. Think about it. Modern life aggressively trains us to only focus on the things. Individual people, tangible objects, your resume, your car, clear-cut definitions, boundaries. We are completely obsessed with the nouns of life. But focusing on the space between shifts the spotlight over to the verbs. It focuses on how those things relate to one another. You stop just staring at the two islands and you finally start looking at the bridge connecting them.
So, the crucial point is that this space between us, it is absolutely not a void. In fact, it is exactly where the magic happens. Think about trust. You can't literally hold trust in your hand, right? It exists strictly in the space between people. Or what about shared understanding? You know, that unspoken resonance when you just get what someone is saying without them even finishing the sentence. And of course, love. None of these are physical things you can just pack up and put in a box. They are entirely composed of that invisible thread connecting us.
To really help us visualize this, the source material uses this brilliant sensory metaphor. Quote, "In music, it's the silence between the notes that makes the melody." I love that. If music was just a constant, unending wall of sound, it would literally just be noise. It would be total chaos. It's the pause, the emptiness, the highly intentional space between the strikes of the piano keys that actually gives the song its rhythm, its emotion, and its beauty. The emptiness isn't nothing. It is literally everything.
Let's move to and see how this builds even further when we look at visual art. Quote, "In art, it's the negative space that gives the subject its form." Just like that minimalist continuous red line on the white background we talked about earlier. That white background, the empty space, isn't just a blank canvas that you're supposed to ignore. The negative space is literally the thing that allows your eye to recognize the shape of the forms being woven together. The invisible is completely shaping and defining the visible.
So bringing these metaphors back to our own human experience, the ultimate takeaway here is that the space between us and our relationships is absolutely not some empty emptiness. It's not a vacuum. It is a highly active, totally dynamic, living, breathing connection. When you're just sitting in silence with a really close friend, that space isn't empty. It's overflowing with shared history and comfort. That invisible thread is always buzzing, always alive, weaving us together just like that red line. Which brings us to our final thought. We live in a world that is just completely obsessed with things. But having explored this incredibly profound concept today, I want to leave you with this question to really chew on. In your own life, in your own daily interactions, where can you start giving more importance to the living, breathing space between? Where can you start paying just a little more attention to that invisible red thread connecting you to the people around you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, I really hope this sparks some amazing connections for you.